Thank you, Madam President, and thank you, members of the General Assembly. Every year since 1992, we have gathered here in this body for what can only be described as political theater, in which the Cuban regime tries to convince itself, tries to convince its international supporters, and tries to convince the Cuban people that the world holds it blameless for its attacks on the fundamental freedoms of its citizens and for the abysmal, despicable economic consequences of its policies. Some of you, many of you, frankly, some as recently as this morning, tell us privately that since the regime cares so much about this vote, that you just want to appease it. You just want to kind of go with the flow and go with the crowd. That's what you tell us privately. But, colleagues, let me suggest today that you do something different this year. The United States and the Trump administration wants to set the record straight when it comes to this resolution and to correct the fake news, the misinformation, and this false reality the regime seeks to create year after year with this vote. The facts are this is an illegitimate and brutal regime that seeks to cast itself as the victim of aggression while plainly describing itself as, quote, the enemy of the United States. It's located just 90 miles off our shore. It conspires and it collaborates with enemies and adversaries of the United States against our interests. The facts are that this regime supports terrorist organizations around the globe. It is allowing mercenaries to fight in the war in Ukraine. It's propping up the Venezuelan regime, and it aids cartels. The facts are that these cartels that it props up are trafficking people, drugs, and weapons, and is aiding and abetting instability in our hemisphere. They undermine democracies in our hemisphere.
I'm very sorry to interrupt, but there's a point of order from Cuba.
Sure. Madam President,
yes? Yes, we have to give the floor to the point of order and the representative of Cuba.
Artículos 71 y 60.
In 61 and 68 of the rules, the permanent representative of the United States is not only lying, substantively deviating from the subject, but is also grossly and expressing against his president, against the dignity of the Assembly and the member states. He is doing so in an uncivilized, crude and gross way that is not acceptable in this democratic forum. Mr. Waltz, this is the United Nations General Assembly. It is not a signal chat, nor is it the House of Representatives.
I ask the distinguished representative of the United States to continue.
Thank you, Madam President. I'm well aware of the location of which we're speaking, and this is also not a communist, illegitimate legislature in Havana. This is a place where we talk in facts, and the facts are the Cuban regime has undermined democracies in our hemisphere. It has oppressed its own people, and it steals from its own people so that, quote, regime insiders can maintain their elite status. I don't need to say that on any type of chat. I'm saying that in front of the entire world, and it is well known within the Western Hemisphere for those who closely pay attention. So I would suggest that our member states stop appeasing the regime with their votes and instead use this vote to send the world a message. I would encourage you to send the regime in Havana a message and send the Cuban people a message. Stop using this vote to blame them and blame all of its economic problems on the United States. No government in history has ever made a communist economy work. Even fellow socialist and communist states are urging Cuba to open its economy to its own people, allow its people to thrive. And the only thing equal about communism and socialism is that everyone is equally miserable and poor. And so just to correct the record, and colleagues, please hear me on this term blockade, on this term embargo, the United States has always allowed Cuba to import food, to import medicine, and to import humanitarian goods. In fact, last year in 2024, the United States exported. I've seen the ships leave the ports in Florida and in Louisiana. It exported $500 million of goods to Cuba, over $585 million of food, of humanitarian aid, of medicine. Colleagues, how is that a blockade? I just heard a colleague here before me describe this as a blockade. $500 million. And in fact, the Cuban regime can trade with any of you, with the entire world, with the rest of the Western Hemisphere, with our friends in Canada and elsewhere. There's no blockade. A blockade would be preventing anything from coming to Cuba. So please stop repeating this propaganda that allows the regime to then go back and have an excuse for its own failures. Let's stop spending these citizens' meager resources on high-end tourist hotels that sit empty while the people are starving. Tell the regime you've seen the investigative reporting about Cuba's military-controlled companies sitting on billions of dollars in offshore and overseas bank accounts, again, while its own people's needs are ignored. Please share with the regime its governance failures that have driven out 2 million Cubans have left Cuba, not coming in, they are leaving, and remind the regime to start prioritizing the needs of its own people. But most of all, it's time the regime is to be held accountable for its own human rights record, for its forced labor to make charcoal and cigars, for the 700 political prisoners that it continues to hold unjustly in prisons under horrific conditions and the constant threat of abuse and torture, the people that are rising up due to the oppression, that are arrested and treated brutally, and let's hold it accountable for participating in the human trafficking of medical professionals abroad that provides a source of cash for the regime. So, colleagues, you can send this message in a very easy way. Abstain from this vote or vote no with the United States. We enthusiastically welcome your support, and we enthusiastically and strongly encourage you to stop propagating this propaganda. There is no blockade. That is absolutely false. Let's send a message today, colleagues, in keeping, as the Cuban delegation has just said, in keeping with the history of this body, in line with human rights, in line with human dignity, and in line with a better future for the Cuban people. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the distinguished representative of the United States. In line with our rules of procedure, the point of order just made by the representative of Cuba will be reflected in the official record of the meeting. We move on with the next speaker. I welcome to the floor the distinguished representative of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela.
Madam President, we affectionately greet His Excellency Mr. Bruno Rodriguez Barria, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Cuba, and his delegation. Moreover, we align ourselves with the statements made by the Republic of Iraq, the Republic of Uganda, and the State of Eritrea on behalf of G77 in China, the Non-Aligned Movement, and the Group of Friends in defense of the Charter of the United Nations, respectively. Madam President, more than 60 years have elapsed since In violation of all norms of international law, a criminal blockade was imposed against the sisterly Republic of Cuba, a free, independent and sovereign nation that is a fully fledged member of this General Assembly. The blockade continues to wreak devastating losses and damage exceeding $5 billion a year. It continues to wreak huge suffering in terms of health, education, access to energy and food. The cumulative effects of the economic suffocation imposed from outside for generations is equivalent to the destruction resulting from a war. Because the blockade is an act of economic war, one which seeks to subjugate through hunger, sickness and death an entire people. That is the truth that people seek to hide when they call this crime a simple policy measure. We, in Venezuela, know exactly what we're talking about because we are the target of a similar attack waged by the United States imperial regime. I could bring to you myriad data regarding all the suffering we've had visited upon us for the last 10 years, with a policy that's tried to kill Venezuelans through suffering, through visiting suffering upon us, particularly during the pandemic. But it is difficult to hear what we've just heard from the previous speaker when we have been the victims of this economic war, and we're currently victims of military attacks being waged by the United States. President, in this last year, we have seen how the imperial regime of the United States has attempted to besmirch Cuban international solidarity by waging a smear campaign against the medical cooperation programs, the very same programs that saved millions of lives all around the globe, and this at the very height of the pandemic only 5 years ago. The United States has even threatened brotherly nations in the Caribbean and Africa that exercise of their sovereignty benefit from that cooperation. What type of regime can feel any sort of threat from the professional work done by educational and medical personnel? Some people send bombs and weapons as part of their strategy to wage a protracted eternal war. Cuba sends doctors, and that's why we are being attacked, because its example unveils the hypocrisy of those that claim to defend freedom while at the same time they put nations under blockade and support the genocide of entire peoples. In recent months, we have seen a new disinformation operation whose goal is to tie Cuba to the Ukrainian conflict. Nothing could be further from the truth. This is a shady, covert maneuver to confuse the international community, an accusation, a lie that's already been clearly refuted by the Cuban government. We are well aware where these lies come from. They come from the media laboratories of the United States of America's State Department. Their enemies are tailored to the United States' exact needs to deceive sovereign nations and force them to change their vote in the resolution which condemns the US blockade in this General Assembly. The truth is that Cuba has been and will always be a peace-loving country and one which respects international law. Everyone knows that that is true. President, among the most immoral aggressions against us is Cuba's inclusion in the unilateral list of countries that supposedly sponsor terrorism. This decision is entirely baseless. It is an insult to historical truth and affront to the reality, which is plain to see for all of us. Cuba does not sponsor terrorism. We have suffered it firsthand, with attacks, acts of sabotage, and covert operations organized from the territory of the United States itself, where state terrorism is a policy. The evidence is patently clear. In recent weeks, the United States of America has waged a series of massacres against civilians traveling in small vessels in the Caribbean Sea. In so doing, they've sowed terror among the coastal populations of several countries in the region. A few minutes ago, we learned that 4 new attacks had just been waged in the Pacific Ocean. That news was just released a few moments ago. Extrajudicial killings are acts which occur and then their perpetrators claim responsibility for them with total impunity. At the same time, they threaten more political killings, acts of sabotage and invasions of other countries. Where Cuba dispatches doctors, the US dispatches killing. Everyone can see exactly who the terrorist in the Caribbean is. The United States of America use their list of terrorism as a weapon to impose even more bitterly criminal sanctions against the Cuban economy. For that reason, we demand that Cuba be immediately removed from that list that is an affront to reason and justice. The blockade against Cuba is part of a broader imperial policy whose goal is to impose Washington's will across the entire American continent. Panama, Canada, Venezuela. It is the old colonial policy of the Monroe Doctrine that today the US regime is brazenly attempting to revive. Today, this vision is threatening the zone of peace that is the Latin American and Caribbean region, as proclaimed by CELAC in 2014. In Venezuela, we watch the industry of death and terror working at full pelt. Unilateral coercive measures, disinformation campaigns, clandestine sabotage operations, military threats using aircraft carriers and nuclear submarines, and the killing of civilians. And here, from this rostrum, Cuba reaffirms that it will not be possible to undermine our resolve to defend our independence because we have decided to be free. We call upon this General Assembly to defend the zone of peace, to prevent new aggressions against Cuba, against Venezuela, and against any other nation which exercises its right to self-determination. Madam President, the United States of America exports war. By contrast, Cuba exports life, and that is what the empire doesn't want us to see, the example of a people resisting with dignity. Tomorrow, when we vote on the draft resolution that demands an end to the blockade, we must recall that what we're talking about is broader than just Cuba. What's at stake is respect for the right that we have as peoples of the world to live without sanctions or threats. A vote for Cuba is a vote for justice, for peace, and for life. Thank you.